Hey guys, it's Greg Alexander. I got something very important to talk about. And stick with me on this video so you understand exactly what's going on. First, I'm going to lay a little bit of the groundwork. I've been fishing the area that I live in for over 40 years. And in that period of time, we've had some ups and downs in these rivers that we fish. You know, you'll have some year classes that don't do so well and some year classes that do well. And then you have boom years for several years with lots of big fish. But what I'm seeing here lately in our rivers in the last couple years, the last 2 years specifically, is probably some of the worst bigger fish catches that I've ever seen in multiple rivers. And I've had my suspicions about what it is. I've contacted the DNR. They haven't contacted me back, asking what's going on with the Nanticoke, what's going on with the Wycomico, some of our local rivers around here, because not only are the fish catch numbers way down, but there's like no fish like in 2.5 to 4 pound range. You'll catch one big one every once in a while, but there's none of those medium sized fish are gone. They're gone in just about every river that we fish down here now. And I started noticing some areas of the rivers that used to be really good that pretty much have nothing in them or a couple 12-inch fish now and again. And so I suspected that maybe there was some kind of environmental thing going on, largemouth bass virus. Now, they say that there's traces of largemouth bass virus all the time in all bass, but what makes it take off is some things like stress. I thought it might even have been, you know, saltwater intrusion in some of these tidal waters that we fish in, and that may play a part in relocating the fish, but that should just make them more concentrated up the rivers. But up the rivers in the last couple years, especially up the rivers, seems to be way worse than other areas of the river. So saltwater intrusion doesn't make sense there. So largemouth bass virus, it's a possibility, but it's not been conclusively found to be the case according to the DNR. So what's the problem here? Well, let's go back a little bit more, some history here. When COVID came around, you know, they call it COVID-19, it showed up, you know, December 2019. They finally started shutting everything down in early 2020, and people started getting sick. And that year was a good year for fishing. 2020 was a really good year for fishing. I caught tons of big fish, tons of quality fish, tons of numbers of fish everywhere that I went in all of these rivers that we fish. And then 2021, they come out with the vaccine. Well, the spring of 2021 was really good. Really good. I had a great spring. Big fish, lots of fish, the same thing. And then once we got into like the summer of 2021, after the jab came out, I started noticing the fish populations going down, the big fish disappearing. And then last year, it was terrible. There was a couple rivers in particular that got absolutely terrible, worst I've ever seen them. Worst I've ever seen them. And a couple of the other rivers weren't as bad, but still a lot of the larger fish disappeared. So what am I saying? So what I'm saying is, everywhere that there's a sewage treatment plant on these rivers, there's no fish. And downstream and slightly upstream, because these are tidal rivers, because the tide comes in, the tide goes out. From especially the sewage treatment plant areas, the fishing is double, triple, extra horrendous. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't think so. What does a sewage treatment plant treat for? A sewage treatment plant treats for E. coli, bacteria, phosphorus, things that environmentally harm the water you know, in a natural sort of way. They've never really treated, most sewage treatment plants have never really treated or even test for pharmaceuticals. So, something going on here, because we've always, you know, every time you go to the bathroom and flush the toilet, if you're on a city service, it goes to their sewage treatment plant. That stuff is treated, and the pharmaceuticals aren't treated. And they just go where? Right into the river. And then where happens to them in the river? Some of it ends up in the mud because a lot of it's heavy metal stuff. Some of it floats around, and pretty much every fish, amphibian, snake that's in the water breathes this stuff in or absorbs it through their skin, and they end up with the same pharmaceuticals in them that humans have in them, but yet they have a liver that big. You understand? Their liver's that big. Our liver's this big. So it can't process that near as well as a human being or a larger animal of any kind could. So I got curious, and I started doing a little bit of research, and I've understood for years that, and you know, antidepressants and things like that, fertility drugs, all kinds of things that cause infertility that we take for pharmaceuticals end up in the system, and that causes trouble for fish, bass specifically. And I did a little bit of research, and I'm going to show you a clip from an article that I've found. So here it is right here. I'm going to read this to you because you might not be able to see it on the screen. It says, our research group recently reported some effects arising from the exposure of amphibians, fish, and insects to distinct protein fragments of the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. So that could be the original virus or the vaccines which create the spike protein that mimics the SARS-CoV spike protein. Initially from a systemic approach, including the synthesis, cleavage, purification, and alignment of 3 peptide fragments of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, as well as the exposure of neotropical, this word, tadpoles to these fragments, we gathered evidence that confirms the toxicity of rival constituents in the evaluated animal model. In other words, these amphibians, fish, insects. The increase in several biomarkers predictive of oxidative stress and the alteration in acetylcholinesterase, I can't even pronounce that, activity, demonstrated that short exposure, 24 hours, to these peptides was sufficient to affect the health of tadpoles. And it goes on and on about the exposure of SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins, which is the vaccine. So what did we just read? We read that the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the vaccine, which creates the spike proteins for the SARS-CoV-19 virus, in as little as 24 hours of exposure, creates systemic damage to aquatic life. So what does that mean in layman's terms? It means when you take the vaccine or any other thing that has mutated mRNA in it, or mRNA, which fools with your DNA, and you go to the bathroom, and it goes to the sewage treatment plant, and it goes into the river, those fish are going to be affected in as little as 24 hours when they're exposed to any of it that floats into their system, through their gills, in their mouth, wherever. And that explains it, folks. That explains why these rivers especially, maybe not as many lakes now, because the lakes don't have sewage treatment plants on them, a lot of them. But every river around here, with the exception of a few little teeny tiny rivers, have sewage treatment plants on them. Even the Potomac River. If you fish the Potomac River right now, I've been there. I've just won a classic there 2-3 weeks ago. Once you get anywhere close to blue plains up the river, in my opinion, you can't catch them. You might catch a couple little ones, but usually this time of year, they're there. You can't catch them. They're not there. You get anywhere close to the upper end of a lot of these rivers that have sewage treatment plants on them, and I'm not going to name them, but I can think of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sewage treatment plants on 6 different rivers that you can't catch fish more than a couple 12 inches anywhere around these sewage treatment plants. And in some cases, close to the sewage treatment plant is where the torments are held out of, and the release fish aren't even, the retreads aren't even there when you go back a couple days later or a week later. They're gone, they're out, they're getting out of town. Because this stuff that we've done here, this greed, this fear-mongering that our government and governments of the world and pharmaceutical companies and different people have done are coming back to pay the piper now. And it's going to affect your system sooner or later. It's affected ours already. I don't know what the long-term effects of it are, but the short-term effects are pretty devastating. We've had some of the lowest tournament weights and lowest tournament catches over the last 2 years that I can remember in 40 years on all of these rivers. Every last one of them. Now, some of the other places out and about that are far away from the sewage treatment plants don't seem to be bothered. It's definitely a connection. So you can believe me or not, I just read the evidence to you from the scientific journal paper that they had put out that said conclusive, pretty much irrefutable evidence that it's happening. So it's happening, folks. So let's not continue to go here over and over again and play this game with people, these pharmaceutical games that we continue to play with people, which if it's doing it to the fish, what do you think it's doing to you? What do you think it's doing to us? What do you think it's doing to you when you eat one of those fish that's ingested that? What do you think it's doing to you when you come in contact with the water over and over again close to one of these sewage treatment plants? I mean, who knows what it's doing to you? This is not good stuff, people. So anyhow, I thought this was very important stuff that we should be made aware of. Again, try not to get anybody worked up, but this is the reality of the world that we live in today. Greed, power, overrides common sense and the ability for people just to live a normal life anymore, and they don't care. So anyhow, a little bit hard-hitting video is what it is. Thanks for watching. Have a blessed day.